especially Estelle, I love you to come to the sign.
No.
Here's what I'm going to be asking people to do. And let me just, I'm going to set an example before Kaiser does an interruption. But at some point, I'm saying my name is David Newman. My spheres of influence are where my power and influence will have the greatest impact. And my spheres of influence are my family and friends, my Rotary local to global, my club, my district, my international organization, my peace involvement there, my abolition work there, the legal profession, because I've been part of that for a career, and I always think local to global. In terms of legislator, I was a legislator, and I am part of the former Legislators Association. And so local to global, I have influence and connections as a retired person, but all of us have active involvement with our city councilors, our MLAs, our MPs, and we should use that power. As I do, Anglican Church, I'm involved in that for legacy as well, local to global. I'm involved with Salvation Army and the Citizen Advisory Board, and influence that local to global. I'm involved in the multi-faith Golden Rule faith groups, local to global. I'm involved with Wiseocracy and CRRIC, which you'll see CRRIC about here, and Rules of Law on Earth, and a part of CRRIC, which has been created. Truth and Reconciliation, as exhibited by over there in Canada, led by Murray Sinclair. And he always concluded everything he did by saying, it all is for the children. And my pledge is to have the Canadian government, to use my best efforts to have the Canadian government observe, sign, ratify, implement in domestic law of Canada the TPNW, and to campaign for the rest of the countries of the world to do the same. So that will be my pledge. So I ask you, after we get some initial input, ultimately each of you to make that kind of identification of where you can have your impact, what you're going to do, and are you going to do it with a focus on the TPNW as I have chosen to do. My intent is to have these two gentlemen each take 5 minutes they've been through the Youth Nuclear Peace Summit the last couple of days. They have a history in Nobel Peace Prize winning organizations. They are their voices. They are a physician. They are a lawyer. They have taken everything they've learned to commit themselves in their lifetime to this work and chosen TPMW as the means. So now I turn it over to Kaiser to introduce the event.
Thank you, David, so much. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. It's a little chilly, beyond our control, sorry. Today, what we are going to do is to listen to both the gentlemen who are with us for the last couple of days. And it's such a privilege to host them today. Welcome, sir, to this space and especially to the Institute. And a couple of things we'd like to start by treaty acknowledgement that Mediation Services and the Institute is based on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Creole, Jikri, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of Métis Nation. We all are together in the true spirit of truth and reconciliation. Today, our plan, and before I start going into further, I would like to take your consent because we are going to stream this session as a record, as a testimony that we are working towards a nuclear-free world. So if I have your consent, that would be great. Thank you very much. Thank you. A couple of housekeeping things. Washroom is on the left side of the block, and we have, I'm sure you're not using any Wi-Fi, so beside the point. And we have light refreshment laid out. Once you're done, you're always welcome to enjoy the refreshment. To begin with, the MCIC mediation services, mediation services here located in this particular building is kind enough to allow us to host this event today. And I hope Lalima is with us. Okay, so she's bringing the welcome note from mediation services. Lalima, please.
Good morning, all, and welcome to Mediation Services Winnipeg. My name is Lalima Senanayaka, and I'm the former training administrator at Mediation Services and currently a PhD student at in Sentencing Studies at the University of Manitoba. It is an incredible honor to welcome Dr. Ira Helfand and Mr. Seth Sheldon to our premises today. Mediation Services is an organization committed to facilitating peaceful interactions and transforming relationships. We work to create positive and peaceful environments in our homes, workplaces, and communities. To achieve this vision, we have 3 project areas. Our community program, training program, and the court referral program. We are truly grateful to have Dr. Ira Helfand and Seth Sheldon, Mr. Seth Sheldon with us today to share their insight from their Nobel Peace Prize recognized work on nuclear disarmament. We look forward to learning from your experience and commitment to building a safer, more peaceful world. Thank you, and once again, welcome.
Thank you, Lalima. Thank you very much. So we are going to start the session, and we titled the session, as you see on the screen, Where Do We Go From Here? Our request to our esteemed speakers to kindly guide us what they think, and especially we are also interested to learn from them how they defined Youth Nuclear Peace Summit and from where and how we should proceed, especially as a country who has yet not signed any treaties on nuclear disarmament and other stuff. So I'm not going to take much time. Let me go back to our esteemed guests today and speakers. And they're requested to speak 5-7 minutes each just to lay the context. And then we'll open up for the first round of discussion when we titled, as you know, Where Do We Go From Here? Thank you, gentlemen. The floor is yours, sir.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming to this session. I think to frame things, the situation that we're in right now is really quite desperate. And we as a civilization are not responding appropriately. The danger of nuclear war is greater than it's ever been. The time frame that we have to work in is extremely short. And most of us are going about our daily lives as though this were not so. Certainly society as a whole is going about its life as though this were not so. And this has to change, and it has to change very quickly. You know, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you what's going to happen when, but I would say I've been working on this for 47 years, so I don't think I can be accused of being impatient. I don't think we've got more than 5 or 10 years. If we're lucky, if we don't get rid of these weapons or get ourselves clearly committed and in the process of getting rid of them in the next 5 or 10 years, I think absolutely there are just all kinds of events that are conspiring to bring us to that horrible point. And we need some power to convince the rest of the human race that they have to take the step they have to take with these weapons. It's a huge task. It's not something anyone wants to do alone, but it is a doable task. We have created similar changes in policy in the past. During the 1980s, we ended the global arms race, we meaning civil society globally, brought enormous pressure on governments. We're able to bring them back into the global arms race in a matter of 2 or 3 years. And so we know it's possible to do this, and we need to do it again today. I like the framing that David established of pointing out circles of influence, because I think all of us understand that we can't do it alone. And I think we feel somewhat intimidated by the magnitude of the task before us and the feeling of powerlessness, like what can one little person do about this? And The key, I think, to the answer to that problem is that we're not going to do it. We're going to do it by reaching out to the communities that we belong to and mobilizing them. In the States, we've got this campaign called Back from the Brink, and its tagline is bringing communities together to abolish nuclear weapons. And that's our strategy. We're encouraging people to look at their lives, look at what networks they belong to, what faith communities, what Rotary clubs, what labor unions, what professional associations, and figure out how they can get those groups to work with them on this issue, to leverage the power that they have by virtue of these existing associations and relationships. And, you know, there was a spectacular example of this, I think, with the student summit, which we just concluded, which was an amazing event. And there was a lot of work that went into it, but that work was possible. I mean, for example, Stella, who led this effort, it was possible for her to do what she did because she was able to activate a network of schools that she had connections with. It was possible to bring in the museum and to bring in the Rotary Club here because of the existing relationships that David and others had with those institutions. And I think that's really going to be the key to our success. We have to figure out what our strength is, what networks we can mobilize, and then do it quickly. Reach out to those groups and speak to them very frankly, very bluntly, and without any hesitation or shyness, and just tell them the truth. The world we know is at risk. If we don't take action, everything we care about is going to end. And it doesn't have to happen. We can change that. Sorry.
Scott.
Well, that's, well, first, thank you as well to everyone for being here. Thank you to Mediation Services for hosting us. Yeah, it's really great to be here in a place where especially after these last couple of days, I do have hope that we're in the moment where things will change. But I agree with Ira's framing that the world in general is certainly not treating this issue with the urgency that it requires. And you know, I think for decades we've had the framing that some version of which was introduced by John F. Kennedy, but we echo still today, which is that we must eliminate nuclear weapons before they eliminate us. That framing doesn't really have a time clock on it. It's just a thing, an adage that I think we've all come to agree. But as Ira was saying, it's hard to predict when that other possibility will come to pass. But we do know, based on the opinions of so many experts now, that this is the most dangerous time that we've ever lived in, and we could talk about why. But the highest likelihood that we're going to face a nuclear war, and the most certainty we have now, based on the dynamics of the different weapons and the different actors, that there would be no small-scale nuclear war, that if there were nuclear war, it would spell ultimate catastrophe for humanity and for all life forms. So with that understanding, if we, even those who don't agree with our path would, I think, have to concede that is the case, why don't we act with the right urgency to get us to where we need to go? And why do we tend to frame a lot of our solutions as around what we think we can do, what we think is possible, instead of what we know is necessary, right? I mean, if elimination is what we need, then why aren't we asking for it? And I think that, you know, if the framing is where do we go from here, and we're thinking about immediate next steps, this is the challenge, because obviously we know that no one's going to snap their fingers and then there won't be nuclear weapons tomorrow. But I think we do have to approach it, and Ira said this as well, with the understanding that this is doable. You know, when we talk about the other great existential crises that threaten us, threaten our children or future generations, we're talking about some really complicated problems. You know, it's going to be really hard, I think, and especially, you know, the way many governments and capitalist societies in particular are moving to stop the change that we're facing with the climate crisis. It's the dangers we face from socioeconomic disparity. These are really, you know, huge structural changes that we're going to have to work really hard as you know, collective societies to change. Nuclear weapons are in the hands of 9 countries that the majority of people in those countries don't want them. And actually disassembling them is something we've done tens of thousands of times. You know, we all know that at the height of the Cold War, we had more than 60,000 nuclear weapons. Now we have more than 12,000, still far too many, and certainly enough to destroy all of the rubble after all of the people are just already destroyed in the world. But this assembly is not only possible, it's eminently possible, and all that's missing is the political will to take us there. So one thing we'll talk about, I guess, or I certainly will talk about a lot, but thanks to David for your commitment. I couldn't have said it any better. This is my commitment as well, is to further the success of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which, if we talk about the legal landscape of nuclear weapons, legal architecture, this is the newest kid on the block. And this is what our organization works on. And I guess we can talk a little bit about our organizations, but it is the blueprint for the end of nuclear weapons. And I think even if we don't see the path to get there, although I think we do, we should at least know that that has to be the end goal for us, and we have to get there urgently. So I think as we work with our localities and our national governments, and even across the dinner table with our friends and family, we all have to face this, both the problem and the solution, with clear-mindedness that's required to get us there. Your country, Canada, needs to join this treaty. It will be a major moment when it does. And to get us there, I think local action and national and provincial action is the key. We already have a path carved out by a lot of people in this room, I think, too, to do that. And it could be a step to observe this first review conference that's happening next year of the treaty. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, maybe. Should we talk about our organization?
Yeah, I think just talk about the importance of physicians and the whole health issue and environment issue. And you speak about TPNW. Okay. So why don't you begin with how physicians, I mean, they've led this. Why is it? Why not all other groups? Why not accountants and engineers and lawyers?
They've all done this too, actually. But much of the intellectual energy behind the drive to get rid of nuclear weapons has come from the medical community, the health community, and for a very simple reason: this is a health problem. And that framing, I think, is enormously valuable to move the conversation forward. When governments talk about nuclear policy, if you listen to them, it sounds like they're playing chess. It's this very complicated games theory-based conversation. They've done this, so we have to do that. And it's completely divorced from reality. It's just a theoretical exercise. And that's how we get to a situation where during the Cold War, even though the United States, and I assume the Soviet Union also clearly understood that 250 nuclear warheads would destroy their enemies, they each had 30,000. And there's really no rational way of explaining this if you are rooting yourself in the real world. If you're rooting yourself in game theory, it made sense. But we live in the real world, not in game. And what the physicians movement, I think, has done successfully is to ground this conversation on many occasions in reality. What is going to happen? What are the medical consequences as we frame it? What are the humanitarian impacts as the Red Cross frames it of the use of nuclear weapons? And when you focus this conversation, what's actually going to happen if these weapons are used, you get a very different conversation. And we saw this very clearly in the negotiations for the TPNW, which started off somewhat on the usual track of people talking about, nuclear theory and so on. But we were able, we being the International Physicians Prevention of Nuclear War, to interject into that conversation the data about nuclear famine, which was newly emerging at that point, and to come to countries and explain to them, especially countries in Latin America and Africa, both nuclear weapons-free zones. The governments there felt not unreasonably that they had dodged the bullet by creating nuclear weapons-free zones on their continents. And we were able to explain to them that if there's a war between India and Pakistan, 9,000 miles away from Latin America, millions of people in Latin America are going to die from the resulting famine. And that medicalization of the conversation, that grounding it in the reality of what these weapons are actually going to do, really transformed the conversation and led to a totally different discussion and a totally different outcome.
So as a lawyer who is one of the exceptional leaders in this, like Jonathan Branoff and others who have taken international law and use the international law system, as deficient as it is, but use it to better it and embody this whole thing in a treaty. And if you just talk about how that evolved, and you can even bring Canada in, Lloyd Ashworthy and the landmines and then human security concept. You just frame that in a legal way.
Sure. Well, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, we were created in 2007, and today we are basically a coalition of NGOs all around the world, more than 700 in 111 countries, and all dedicated to the stigmatization, prohibition, and ultimately elimination of nuclear weapons. And today, although at the start we didn't have it, but today we have the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons as the main vehicle for advocating and for spreading both the norms and the law of nuclear disarmament. But, you know, we stand on the shoulders of decades of people and movements that brought about prohibitions of other weapons and also campaigned for the prohibition of nuclear weapons for so long. And we're both working with them, but also following their example. And so when Ira talks about the role of physicians, this was a key guidepost for the work that the entire campaign has done to bring about the TPNW. So, you know, the treaty was negotiated in 2017 and adopted in 2017, and we won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. What happened before that and the road to get there? And that was all about the reframing that I was talking about, because we basically convened these series of humanitarian conferences, humanitarian consequences conferences that in Norway, in Austria, in Mexico, that helped brought governments to discuss, you know, exactly what I was talking about. That what do nuclear weapons really do? Let's try and take it out of the context of just state security and talk about what they really are, what they really do. And this was a strategic reframing because it helped us redefine where the expertise is. Because, you know, as Iris was just saying, like if you just give in to the status quo, you're letting military leaders and politicians talk about, you know, well, if we have this many and this is what will require for us to win in the event that we have some conflict, whatever win means after, you know, you've blown up the entirety of the populations, then, you know, you're already lost. That's an argument that you're never going to win, I think, because it's already, the framing of it is already absurd. But if you talk about what nuclear weapons really do, then you're changing who the experts are. Then you have the doctors who can say, well, this is what will happen to human bodies. You have climatologists who can say, this is what will happen to Latin America in the event that this conflict between India and Pakistan launches that much soot and debris from this detonation over this populated area or this industrialized area, that it launches and sloughs up into the upper atmosphere, all of this soot, and blocks out the sun and causes climate change that affects other regions. You know, when you reframe this conversation, you have the scientists who talk about, like, basically how these weapons work. And most of all, you have the people who have been affected by the detonations that have already happened. And that's a huge part of the reframing, is to talk about what nuclear weapons are doing now in real life to people who are really here now, instead of this theoretical role they may have this future conflict or to prevent future conflict. And so this was the reframing that actually won the day, because once we got governments in the room to talk about this, it pointed them all to agreeing that, of course, the only solution would be elimination, and the only way to get elimination was to have an agreement that prohibited nuclear weapons. And so that's how we got the TPNW. And of course, lawyers were involved. This is I left out the lawyers, but obviously it's people with knowledge about the way to how to write a treaty and how the role of international humanitarian law, what the setting of international humanitarian law had to say about nuclear weapons already, because we're also building on a panoply of legal frameworks where we're trying to reinforce what we already know to be true, which is that any use of nuclear weapons, even before the TPNW, would be illegal. We can sort of debate. I'm sure there are other IHL experts in the room that we could talk about, the role of the 1996 ICJ case on this. But I think, it's even through that lens of that case, I think, any use of nuclear weapons, it's really the exceptions that people cite, are really stretch the mind, and increasingly so as we understand long-term consequences of nuclear weapons. So I firmly believe that IHL prohibits use of nuclear weapons. And then it's a matter of also expanding that concept to now, what about possession of nuclear weapons? What about nuclear deterrence and threats to use nuclear weapons? And bringing in the IHL framework, but also other emerging frameworks, like jus ad bello, like the concept of when it's illegal to threaten force, and the fact that nuclear weapons in their very existence is a constant threat of force. And what about human rights law? Because we now have an increasing understanding of the relevance of human rights law. So all of this input into the formulation of the treaty and our arguments for why countries need to join it today.
Maybe you can just, each of you, you first, just deal with the accident situation, because we're led to believe that whether or not nuclear weapons will be used in the hands of leaders of countries. That's disturbing enough when we know who the leaders of countries are that make the decision. But what other ways could we be engaged in nuclear war, not by a decision, but by other circumstances, accidents, misinterpretations, misunderstandings?
I mean, that's a great point to offer, David, because I think at its base, the people who support the continued existence of nuclear weapons, people who oppose the TPNW, are trying to assure us that they can manage the situation. That somehow or other we can maintain these enormous arsenals and they won't get used. And I think what we need to understand, this is very difficult because it's awful truth, but it is true. If nuclear weapons continue to exist, it is inevitable that we will have a nuclear war. It is not a question of whether we will. It's really only a question of when. The myth has been perpetrated, has been brought to us that deterrence works. That if you have both sides have nuclear weapons in a conflict, neither one will use them. We know from history that's not true. We haven't used them since Nagasaki, but we have come so close on so many occasions. And on those occasions, we didn't get by because the leaders were really smart, because they knew what they were doing, because they had perfect technology that guided their decisions. We got by because we were lucky. And luck doesn't last forever. And that really is the situation. In 1979, in 1980, twice in 1983, again in 1995, there were major false alerts, in which either Washington or Moscow believed it was under attack on the other side. And on those occasions, the country that thought it was being attacked began the preparations to launch its own nuclear arsenal, something which deterrence theory tells us should never happen. But it did 5 times at least that we know about. And actually there was an incident in the 60s as well, so 6 times that we know about. And there are probably other times that we don't know, because much of this information was originally classified. So time after time, deterrence has failed. A country with a large nuclear arsenal has decided to use that arsenal. And we've all been saved because at the very last minute, literally the last minute, people figured out that we weren't under attack. We, the Russians, we, the Americans, both sides were doing this. And that, I think, is a critical part of the understanding we need to bring to people. This is not, as we are led to believe, a stable situation. It's a profoundly unstable situation. Even without the dynamic to war that we see now between the US and Russia, the US and China, India and Pakistan, Israel and Iran, even without that, the chance of just an accident, of some computer system failing and creating a false alert, it's happened before. It can happen and probably will happen again. I just don't know.
And from a legal perspective, just from within take the American government and the role of the lawyers in JAG and the legal branch of the defense system and the advisors, the generals, and then the generals advisors to State Department. The role of lawyers in all of that, because I can tell you that I'm horrified when I hear, of course, those lawyers can't effectively say it would be illegal to use a tactical nuclear weapon because we don't have expert evidence. We've never had a nuclear weapon used since 1945. We haven't used a tactical one. And what are the implications? Is it going to be disproportionate in terms of damage? How many citizens are going to die? What impact on nature? What long-lasting effects? We need expert opinions. We don't have the evidence. So lawyers cannot prevent a decision maker from saying what I'm doing is not illegal.
Yeah.
Deal with it.
Well, I think that lawyers in different parts of different branches of different governments have, especially when you've read declassified opinions from some of the lawyers, you kind of find the pathways to basically taking apart any legal defense of weapons and any opposition to the TPNW. I mean, and I think those what we've gotten is acknowledgments that that first of all that the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons does have an effect on the legal frameworks for IHO.
Well, there's no TPNW will legalize even the possession of nuclear weapons.
Sure, but I mean even before they join, right? I'm saying the effect down. So it's interesting to look at some of the analysis from some of these countries that protest any change, and anybody who's pushing for change, basically saying that it's meaningless, because they've also admitted that it's not meaningless. But to also, even outside the legal framework, just follow on what I was saying too about nuclear deterrence, and it being this other fairy tale that I think people in a lot of these established spaces have been hanging on to. It's so eminently clear that there's so much fallibility in it, and whenever you talk to these people, you can quickly access how illogical this and how dangerous this sort of fairy tale that they're holding together is. And Ira talked about the false alerts and the accidental launches or near launches. There have been also hundreds of actually mistakes, I guess, miscalculations that have led to nuclear bombs being dropped and not going off, or nuclear weapons falling to the bottom of the ocean and are still there, and all kinds of things that you know that if it had gone a different way, it could spell this great catastrophe. And when you talk about the entire structure of nuclear deterrence is founded on this decades-old game theory that was devised when, first of all, we're talking about a bipolar system with the US and Russia, and that's obviously changed. And also it's based fundamentally on rational actor theory, which, I mean, think about that for a second. Even if you did have faith that the leaders closer to you, maybe across the southern border, were rational. That's really not even the question. What you're asking when you're dealing with the nuclear deterrence rational actor theory is if your adversary is rational. That's the ultimate question. So in all of our work to, for our governments that are demonizing and talking about these adversarial leaders in Russia or China, well, then I think it's an appropriate question to ask, is say, so why are we so invested in nuclear deterrence and keeping us safe? Because you're basically saying that you trust every day, not Donald Trump, but Vladimir Putin not to do something irrational. That's what it's based upon. So you're actually asking your leaders to trust your adversary in the context of nuclear deterrence. That's the structure we built. And if you're in India and Pakistan, let's say, this conflict that's always ready to bubble up, it seems, you're asking, these two leaders to trust each other across that border too. I think we need to work harder to expose the myth and really the scam of nuclear deterrence, but not just from a legal perspective.
Okay.
Well, can I
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's important for us to understand that there is no legal solution to this problem, because there's no one who can enforce the law. We can have a perfect world court judgment that the possession of nuclear weapons under all circumstances is illegal. There's no mechanism for enforcing that.
Not yet. Not yet.
Similarly, the medical profession can't solve this problem. We have offered our prescription, which is the need to abolish nuclear weapons if everyone to join the TPW. But we have no way of enforcing people to follow our medical advice. Ultimately, this is a political question. We've got to create the political will. And that speaks very much to the job that we all have to do as citizens. We can use the legal arguments. They're very powerful. They help to persuade people to join us. We can certainly use the medical arguments. They're very powerful. They can help people to join us. But we've got to build that political movement. And part of the problem I think that we're dealing with is that all of us, including those who are active on this issue, have a great deal of difficulty believing the truth that nuclear war can actually and will actually happen. Even if we know it in an abstract intellectual way, it's just really hard. When you look out at your city, you can't imagine this all disappearing in a second. And during the 80s, we got past that to a significant degree. Millions of people actually did believe that there could be a nuclear war. We have to create that same level of fear and understanding again in the general population and even in ourselves. Because, and it's a fine line. I mean, you don't want to just sort of run around screaming, the sky's going to fall. But, and you have to protect yourself. I mean, you have to maintain enough, what's the word I'm looking for? Enough division in your mind. You need to be able to partition things enough so that you can go about your daily life, which you need to do too. But you also have to figure out how to let this information in to that part of your mind which controls your actions. And we act on what we believe to be true more than what we know to be true. So we have to get to that level of belief that this really can happen. And therefore it really is important that we work diligently to make sure that it does.
So I think that's a great segue into participation. We're almost halfway through the hour and a half. And I'd like to go clockwise and have a sharing. Some of you, Stanley, for example, is the director at the Morrow Institute for Peace and Justice, kindly with the law school and the Masters in the Human Rights program led by Mary Sharif, hosted an event. And because Seth couldn't make it on time, it gave it finally a chance to show an old film done by the National Film Board, which is about nuclear war on the prairies. And the actors are real life people, doctor, a physician, a farmer. I mean, everyone talking about the impact. So what I'm asking you to do is really indicate what you, in your sphere of influence, can do, and what impact, if you're at the Nuclear Peace Summit, how did that help? What did you get out of that? So you had a piece of it, Stanley. Gary a piece of it. Tanuka's totally new. You're a master's student, a mediator and a PhD student. And just go around the room and share and just appreciate, 2-3 minutes it would give you a chance to get it across without preventing others from doing so. So Stanley, welcome your perspective on this, and think about what can I do in my position, in my family, in my community, in the University of Manitoba, and to get the Canadian government to at least begin by participating and then actually engage in supporting this as quickly as possible before it's too late.
Before I say anything, he always puts me on the spot.
You always, so keep it up. Do it again.
Thank you, Ira, and thank you, Seth, for the work you're doing. So let me just share my own thinking or thoughts that was happening when you were sharing what you were sharing. You framed it as we are not responding appropriately to the urgency of our times. And that you've been working with this for 47 years. And you followed up by saying that we're not treating this issue with the urgency that is required. And that, and then the theme of our talk here is where do we go from here? And one of the questions I kept asking is, how did we get here? How did we get here? And it's not as if the atomic bomb was not used, it was. We've seen it. So then I asked myself a question, what issues are the political leadership today treating as urgent, such that it will continue to keep nuclear armament? And look, I work in this neck of the woods, and I'm asking what's my sphere of influence? I see, and this is not a statement, but more of a question. We live in a world of fear. We live in a world of a lack of trust, and therefore there is this natural desire to want to protect ourselves. There's also this want to dominate, and there is misinformation, disinformation, lies that are treated as truths by some. And if we have a baby in diapers that's leading a nation, and that's very easily throwing tantrums at anything that speaks against, that's huge. So what can we do? I see myself in my role as, how can I begin to build a culture of trust? How do we begin to trust each other in such a way that we do not see need these bombs, threat of bombs, and so-called deterrence? So my question is it even important, relevant, urgent to rebuild a culture of trust between nations, between political leaders, and between people? And in my own, at the University of Manitoba, I see a tremendous lack of trust. And what is going on right now with Israel, Ukraine, there is an existential threat being felt.
Okay, so Stanley, I think that you've shown that need. But right now, if the obvious immediate solution is available through TPNW, why
education?
Education. So, and how do we get that into? The law students and the master, the human rights students, and in your case, the peace and conflict masters and PhD students.
But continuing to have conversations by growing more, bringing them into that conversation. I think creating an environment where we begin to start listening to what the other has to say.
Good. What would
Your turn.
yeah.
I just,
Oh,
I was going
I just wanted to offer a thought about how we can build trust. You know, the thing that often brings people together is a common enemy. And there's this whole genre of science fiction where the aliens come down and the whole world unites to fight them. We've created the aliens, I think, in the form of nuclear weapons. And in the 1980s, that was the way we built trust, by talking directly about that. What brought the United States and Soviet Union together was that they both were able to realize that their nuclear arsenals posed an existential threat to both of them. And so in a moment of incredibly profound distrust and suspicion and hostility, at least as bad as what we're in right now, the United States and the Soviet Union were able to come together around the need to deal with their common enemy, the nuclear arms race. And in the context of dealing with that, negotiating the end of the Cold War arms race, an enormously greater degree of trust was built. And I think we should look at that model as, how do we build trust today? Well, we acknowledge that we're in this together, that if we don't get rid of these nuclear weapons, we're all going to die. And we get the leadership of the United States and Russia and China, in particular, the three great powers, to begin a dialogue based on that. And I think that's where we're going to be able to change things. This is, as Seth pointed out, this problem is easy. This isn't like dealing with a climate crisis where we have to redesign the entire global economy. We can do this in a matter of years. Once the decision's taken, we won't even know what is happening. Just take place off of some military bases. This could be the model.
Can I ask Stanley a question?
Oh,
No, just,
You want to have a conversation?
yeah, okay, so I just wanted to open it up. So what I'm going to do is suggest you listen to the input, and then we have them respond to what appeared. Gary, you were at the Youth Nuclear Peace Summit. Your background as a lawyer. You're a wonderful 100% volunteer peace builder kind of guy, co-chair of Peace Days, president of MCIC. What would you contribute to this discussion as we go around the room?
So I think dialogues are really good. So this is important, but leadership support. If you think about truth and reconciliation, you look at Maurice and Claire. Wow. So who's the leader that you guys could identify? I don't care. Is it the Dalai Lama, the Pope, a country leader or something? We need a little more visible leadership, and then we need education. The story is compelling. You just have to tell it.
What about faith groups, Gary? You're involved in multi-faith.
Yeah, to a minor level, but I think there's a huge opportunity because whatever your beliefs are, they reach a few billion people if you could bring them together. So again, there's organizations, the Parliament for World Religions. It's been around for quite a while.
So the Soka Gakkai Institute is absolutely focused on nuclear weapon abolition. Why don't all faith groups rally around with them and bring in all of them and Salvation Army and all of them together to under the golden rule to really treat others as they want to be treated and include nature in the word others and future generations.
Why not?
Okay. Tanuka, you're new to this. You're a brilliant young woman and Rotarian. What are your observations at this point?
So for me, I've become very practical of recent, and obviously there's no simple answer, but what comes to my mind is consciousness raising and capacity building, because we can have all the conversations we want to have, but at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, it's like when COVID was happening and we're pushing each other for the toilet paper in the grocery store. It's like self-interest, like our amygdala, hijacks us and self-interest takes over. And so I think that maybe there should be a conversation around self-interest. And I know that working from a place of fear is not ideal, but maybe this is a case where you need to scare the child straight so they can come to their senses, like, you know, we're all gonna die. Like, you know, and not like just from a place where people actually believe it. Because one of the things I have realized when I've started to have conversations around people, like around with people, is that sometimes we think we're communicating and the other person just honestly doesn't believe you, right? So a lot of conversations around climate change, like there are people who honestly do not believe it's real. Like they're not being facetious. They just think that you're fake news and they don't believe you. Like so I think that this is a consciousness raised on a self-interest perspective, and we need to remove ourselves and our egos from kind of necessarily being the faces of it, because sometimes you might have to work with someone you don't like very much because they're the person who can communicate in the way that it needs to be communicated so things can get done. And sometimes that can get a little dicey.
Okay,
Yeah.
next.
So I've been working in the demining sector since 2019, and Lloyd Axford, the Canadian foreign minister at the time, led the Disarmament Treaty, Mind Man Treaty, which is also known as Ottawa Treaty. But I'm like, from this conversation, I'm quite surprised. Why isn't Canada a state party to the nuclear ban treaty? So as I'm a researcher and I've been working in the sector for some time now, so my role would be to do further research and publish on this particular sector. That's what I feel, where I fit in this conversation. And I'm also interested to know how Canadian advocacy groups could be a part of this in influencing the politicians to be a part of this important conversation.
Just as trying to respond to that one, because you got it right.
Actually, you know, I think I may have, but I mean, what's interesting about all of the first four interventions is how they're sort of posing the questions of you know, how do we proceed with a framework to build trust that gets us there? And then the question, you know, penultimate question is like, how do we proceed in a framework where there's no trust, where people operate from self-interest? And then there's the question like, you know, where are our leaders? Like, where's both church and state? And the amazing thing to me about how these questions frame what we're trying to do is we are doing all these things. We have ultimately a reach challenge right now. We have the problem that we're not, you know, if you look at NGOs operating, let's say in the climate sector, there's some, you know, I think it's something around $800 million of funding coming from governments and foundations to help, you know, them advance their cause. And then nuclear weapons, it's like a couple million. You know? And that's just to say that that's kind of why we're struggling to answer these questions, but we have the answers. Lloyd Axworthy, he signed a letter asking Canada to join the TPNW. He was he's part of the movement of Canadian former prime ministers, foreign ministers, to get Canada to join. I mean, of course, Canada should be a shining leader in this, but Canada has a complicated history, of course, with nuclear weapons and a very difficult relationship with NATO. It requires boldness, it requires leadership. We have that leadership from Suffolk Backpack, but from all of so many, I mean, you asked about the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama has endorsed the TPNW and ICANN. You asked about the Pope.
TikTok.
What?
Put him on TikTok.
Well, help us do that. I mean, but the Pope changed the entire framing of the Catholic perspective. The last Pope, sorry, Pope Francis, you know, nuclear weapons use had always been a violation of the encyclical under the Vatican, but Pope Francis made possession also, you know, prohibited. Like that was a huge change. And then the Holy See has been an enormous leader in the work of the treaty and has gotten many Catholic populations to come and support it. But then in terms of the framing, I mean, we have the answers to both. I mean, yes, I agree that building trust is a huge part of of getting us to where we want to get to. But, you know, as Ira said, like, building the law is only as good as people respect it. There's no way to enforce a lot of the rules that we build, in the sense that if a transgression happens, it happens. It's already happened. But we have the frameworks, I think, to sort of to get us there, and we have the answers to why people need to do it. Either for their own self-interest, because otherwise the other is nuclear weapons, and as Ira was saying, that's the common enemy here. And so that's the thing that we should always be emphasizing, is that it's not even the people, it's the weapons themselves that fight.
So part of, go ahead.
Okay. For my part, I got involved when I was 16, and so I came in 2019 at the first Youth Nuclear Peace Summit. And so I came in at a really good time, because the TPNW a few years later was coming into force, but it was a really cool time to see this shift take place, when everybody was starting to lean more towards the humanitarian impacts, and to see that focus is where I came in. And so most of my work has been dedicated to that, the TPNW and youth engagement. And youth engagement over the past few years has gotten so much more involved, and you see at the UN with Youth for TPNW, with across the world in various organizations. It's really cool to see them grow and spread, and the work that they do is very diverse, which is really cool as well. It's intersectional, it's intergenerational. A lot of it's based on storytelling and art. It's really cool as well. It's intersectional, it's
Echo, that's good.
yeah, but I think the art piece too of it, and just the way people go about it, is so different, especially with youth, because some of them are doing film screenings, or art projects are a huge thing. And seeing what they did and the art that they created at the Youth Nuclear Peace Summit on Thursday and Friday was really amazing. Some of them were really intense, and others were really in depth. And a lot of thought went into it, and a lot of the action items that the youth came out of it with were also very diverse. It was really interesting, because some came at it more of a technical computer kind of side, and then others came at it more, let's start a youth or a school group. Let's start interacting with climate change groups within our schools. And so it's, I don't know, for me, like, that youth engagement is so important, and it can be so impactful for when you go to parliamentarians, to have all of these youth, like, 50 youth going to see a parliamentarian. They can't ignore you. They can't not say, I'm going to meet with you, because especially if they're a constituent of that parliamentarian, it's very hard for them to say no, because that'll look bad on them. So I think that youth element is so important, and to see the ways that they're going about it is very impactful. And especially when they're engaging with the TPNW and with actual goals that those parliamentarians can then take, it can be really impactful.
Thank you so much, and congratulations. You did a great job emceeing and leading by example. Thank you. Ollie.
Good morning. My name is Melanie, and I'm looking here at Murray Sinclair, and I'm saying, okay, that Truth Commission took many years. It pulled a lot of voices together. It synthesized a report, and it produced calls to action. Of those 94 calls to action, only a handful really have made progress, but some have, and some were the easiest things. Anybody taking the citizenship oath now to Canada to become a citizen has to include the phrase to honor the treaties. School education has to include the true history from the voices of the people who are not heard in a colonial situation. So specific actions. I don't know, Stan, I don't know how much the Morrow Center or Peace and Conflict Studies knows about the International Peace Museum's conference being held here in August. We've got now until November 15th, put in proposals for a roundtable, for presentations, for art projects, for workshops. There's ways now to magnify. I've probably been a social justice advocate even earlier than you, circumstances. And the self-interest piece that you referred to, I've spent time trying to figure out how do you align mutually self-interest? What is it about business that needs resources that are not going to be here? What is it about philanthropy? You said, oh, no, my goal is just health. My goal is just women. Right? Figuring out those intersections of mutual self-interest where you can speak the language of the person who needs to understand where that intersection is taking place. There's many levers like that I would suggest are in front of us, and those of us who have different connections to them can push on those levers. Thanks.
I know where she lives.
We're going to get to you soon.
I have a question, because I have many spheres of influence, organizations that I belong to as a volunteer, so we've got PNW. And when I talk to people, and I'm thinking of family or friends or people within those spheres, I think they do feel that sense of, they don't really know anything about nuclear, and they're kind of, oh, well, yeah, that's nice, that's what you do. But it's how to take that to the next step. And so how to engage in that, you're talking about thinking of the language of the person, of what they're interested in, and building on that. Because nuclear, what I learned from the summit, and I'm one of the people who planned the summit, and I'm so inspired. The students, the youth are our teachers. And if we listen to them and follow their example, we get farther ahead than if we just stick with our own. But personally, I'm thinking about how can I take those conversations to a place where I can engage them in this importance of this issue. Because I know that they're already fearful, someone else spoke about that, the personal interest, that they're already fearful of so much. To bring the discussion of nuclear disarmament into it is like just too much to deal with. And so that's my question to you, is how to take those individual conversations to the place where you can promote the necessity of taking action, and what action can I suggest that they take?
Okay, just hold that for a minute because we'll get into that.
Sure.
Okay. Hold on. Yeah. And by the way, Maureen and her husband is now still Spartan spirit there, but physically he's not there in the way he used to be. But Soka Gakkai Institute has been really a forceful exemplar of what religious faith groups could do. And what are there, 18 million worldwide? So you think of movements and you think local. I mean, Gary, to get something like Gakkai Institute.
Yeah, Gary, we'll get together.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for hosting this event. I really enjoyed, I always enjoy hearing Dr. Ira and Seth speak, but also really have enjoyed hearing about everyone in the room so far. And it's a really interesting convening of people from different spheres, landmine campaign. And yeah, it's just, and I really appreciate hearing diverse thoughts on and questions on the subject matter, and appreciate the facilitation of this.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah, so I think that this, as well as the Youth Summit, are really beautiful places of convening diverse voices and giving trust to contribute. Somebody said that change happens at the rate of trust, and I think like the summit does that really well. You guys put trust in students to do accurate research and present to each other, and that whole model of not just inviting them to come and learn, but to actively teach each other, I think is really beautiful. And I think trust can be really difficult, especially in coalition building. A lot of groups, it's easier sometimes, or it's more efficient to work alone than to work in coalitions. In my experience, I think the women's movement did it really well this year when the gender movement, when the Ministry of women and gender equality was removed, like 300 plus unions that work on different things that don't get along came together and advocated for it to be reinstated in Canada. And that was no single group kind of took the credit for it. It was like a coalition. And it was the first time I think I've ever seen the 300 plus diverse opinions on what should happen in policy come together and say this institution should exist. So yeah, how do we build trust and coalitions between movements? How do we choose to work together even when it's easier to work alone? Because we have a bigger reach and we have a bigger impact when we choose to work in a coalition, even though it's a lot more challenging. And I think even just like within our parliament, sometimes different parliamentarians, want to work separately on the same issue or don't want to work together, even though if they did and compromised, it would be more effective. They have different angles. They have different friends in parliament. They'd be able to. So how do we convince? And I think how do we convince parliamentarians? How do we convince everyone to work together, even though that's sometimes a lot harder and less efficient than working alone? If we all are in agreement that we need numbers at this point.
Sir. So my name is Steve Rao. I'm retired. In 1982, I co-founded a conference on the fate of the earth. It was held in New York City. With David Brower, who at the time was Dean of the Environmental Movement. I was active with Dan Ellsberg, who Ira says we did use nuclear weapons a number of times by pointing them at people, Vietnam and so on. If you've ever had a gun pointed at your head, which I have, that's what a nuclear weapon is about. A policeman once thought I had done something which somebody else had done, which I witnessed, and he pointed a gun at my head and said, pull over. Well, I knew what I was doing. At the time of that conference, I recognized that we didn't know something that led to nuclear war. We had three questions. One, where are we? Two, where do we want to be? And three, how do we get there? Those are all the things that we've been talking about, but a little bit more. How did we get here? And that gun being pointed at my head was a traumatizing moment. And trauma is about our psychological experience of ourselves and our world. And it informs everything we do if we've been traumatized. And if we haven't been traumatized, we have a greater sense of tolerance and well-being. It's what we call a window of tolerance. And if you're outside that window of tolerance through trauma, you either get depressed or you get agitated. And that's what we're witnessing in the world. The baby in diapers who's running the world right now is agitated. And a lot of people are depressed. So I've been looking at the psychological phenomenon of what nuclear war is about. And just this month, I think, one of the speakers at our conference died. And that was Robert Lifton, who wrote about a great deal about Hiroshima and what he called nuclearism. And a colleague of his who wasn't able to make it to the conference, a man named Eric Evanson, talked about human development. And I think these things are all a key part of where we need to be understanding and going, because what happened in the 1980s was good, and I was part of it. I was part of the nuclear freeze movement, and I was part of the conference and the coalitions, and I brought environmentalists and peace groups together. But we're back there now. And we want to get to a place where we feel we don't want to be back there, because that's security, that's sustainability. And in order not to get back there, we have to figure out what psychologically we need to do as part of our narrative, as part of our mood, as part of our tolerance, to get to a better place. So anyway, I've been writing about that. That's what I'm doing. That's my sphere of influence. I'm writing about it. Get some material published. I've been doing the same with the war in Israel and Gaza. And I think that's an important effort. We need to get psychologists and psychiatrists, therapists involved, because this is a therapeutic problem. You do not incinerate people unless there is something therapeutically in the way you function as a human being. It's not the way human beings are. The word human being does not include that kind of disaster. It includes caring, empathy, those kinds of things. So that's one.
Thank you.
Wonderful contribution from a psychologist.
Thank
I
you.
want to get through it. Still,
All right. First of all, thank you for organizing this. I'm gladly taking notes. And I want to jump in on what Melanie had said, that 94 calls to action. And I think if we had a target list of 4 individual groups, or I'll give you an example. Let's say, like right now, I don't think a lot of people realize what are the roadblocks to for countries to sign, like NATO, so that would be like, why? Why are they not signing? To me, the biggest question in life is why. You ever talk to a 2-year-old? Why? It's a damn good question. And why are we doing this? So I think there has to be a development where we can look at this and say, okay, Stanley, which I'm still going to talk to after, like the whole notion of what could you tick off in your organization? Are you going to target this? So if we can organize in a systemic way how to approach this, and I have to get to know you as well, because that whole psychological is preventing people from action. So that whole notion, and make the summit has got legs. And I'm telling you, we can bring in more people, more youth, and youth are suffering. So, but I am a big believer in the therapeutic feeling of doing something, and giving them hope. So and Melanie is like just down the street from me. She's going to regret coming to this. And looking at
The municipalities.
yeah, but bringing, like, we're waiting for a list of themes. We're waiting for a list of notions that Sarah is putting together and a report. I think I was writing. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sign her up for something that she didn't sign up for. Anyways, we could start looking at that and bringing students together. But it's the history of it. It's all of these questions that we're circulating around here and putting in. Can we target this? Why are people not signing? I'm going to stop that. I'm still talking to you, Sam.
pass.
Yes, I'm going to pass.
Larry?
When I was younger, I used to get my information from the encyclopedia. As I got older, you go to the internet. Now you don't know what to believe, because there's so many alternate facts out there, misinformation, that I believe we're all like-minded here for disarmament and stuff. But how do you get through that part of misinformation that's out there? Politicians are misinforming people, or I feel they are, or I'm misinformed. Just, just a spot I'm in that I'm lost.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Anyways.
At my dinner table, my late father used to say, let's not argue about facts, because we'll go to the Encyclopedia Britannica to get the solution and accept that and move on to the differences of opinion.
Right, thank you, David. So my name is Rafael. I'm a human rights officer with the United Nations, and my main responsibility is the preparation of a report on the human rights impacts of nuclear weapons testing in the Marshall Islands. And there's a million and one ways of unpacking this issue, but perhaps I'd like to highlight 2 that relate to the question, directly to the question posed. The first is the relationship, well, the first is accessibility, and the second, its relationship with education. So one of the things that we've realized when it comes to our sphere of influence in our office is that the UN is, of course, the interstate organization. But what we need to do is relate our work down to the trenches, down to the grassroots. And that's what we're trying to do through this mandate by engaging directly with the Marshallese people, the Marshallese government. And one of the things that we've picked up on quite early into this conversation, and this builds upon the comments given, I think that Stanley had raised it up himself, is the role of education. But perhaps just to keep things brief though, what I'd like to highlight is how education is indeed a means towards a just end. But interestingly enough, is also justice in and of itself. In these conversations, what we've seen is that accountability for the impacts of nuclear from the Marxist perspective is not necessarily throwing someone into jail or punishing someone in the way that lawyers traditionally trained would conceive, but it would be through the form of acknowledgement, through apology, and indeed education is one of the main means we discuss.
That's why I got 2 posters up here. Indeed, and that's the kind of justice we're talking about. And that's the kind of justice he's.
Absolutely, and I think Stanley raised a very good point about having this conversation. It's incredibly important. Perhaps one thing I'd like to add is perhaps we should have this conversation at a much earlier stage in education as well, not only among university students, but through appropriate curricula tailored for primary and secondary schools. So let me take a pause. You have Janine. Do you want to have the last word?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Maureen, and thank you, everybody. I think it's a great stroke of luck that I'm here and I've got a chance to listen to everyone and learn from each one of you. I'll bring in a personal story here about, we hear about atomic bombs, we've heard about Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and, disarmament. My first personal experience of a bomb was, my father was a doctor. He was serving in Iran. This is early 80s. And we were in India at that time, and the war was heightened in Iraq, and Iraq was attacking. And so he was in a village where there was this hospital, and he was the only doctor serving in that hospital. And there were, bombs every day, and everybody at home was telling him to come back. And he said, not at this time. This is the time I should be here. So he continued to serve. And a lot of casualties each day, but there was this one day where they dropped the bomb at the hospital. And so he had just walked out of the hospital. He was just few steps away and he was blown. He had casualties, injuries, and then he had no choice but to come back home. So as a child, I saw him. I was very young at that time. I saw him. And for me, it left a very deep impact of what war or what a bomb can do, because I saw him in a very different state. So that impacted me very differently. And deep down, I always questioned, why a war? Why a bomb? Because I had seen it firsthand. And I think that was my determination to work for peace, that I have been associated with Soka Gakkai for 25 years now. And I work as an employment readiness instructor for Regina Condor, where I see people. I've had people from Syria, I had people from Somalia, Eritrea, all different countries, working with displaced families, refugees. And I see that suffering in my class. If you talk to them, you see that just comes out. So, and for me, it was like, I can work for peace through my work. So working with them, I think it is my bit that I can do for a peaceful world. But I think coming here, it was like shattering that myth. It's like something more that you can do. And I really like what you said, that you need to take this information to a part of your brain where it spurs you to action and, alliances with the different organizations. And I work very closely with the Regina District Labor Council. So again, my question is, how do I take this? How do I take this message out there and make an impact?
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just one final word. Voice from India. Punjab. Okay, go ahead.
So when discussing the issue of nuclear disarmament, you emphasize the importance of engaging broader population and transforming it to public. But how can such a movement be cultivated in context of countries like India and Pakistan, where the capability, the nuclear capability has been intervened with the issue of national pride and patriotism?
Just that one, there were so many wonderful thoughts to respond to, and I think I'll have a hard time synthesizing all of them. I think I just want to say that, the impact of the personal story you share reminds me of my conviction that Canada will join this treaty, India and Pakistan will join this treaty, countries will join this treaty, and the only question is, will it happen before or after there's a great catastrophe? Because it is the personal experience that I think makes us understand, of course, that these kinds of weapons, all weapons, but especially these totally indiscriminate weapons, need to be eliminated. Now, I think in some cultures, in some places, as you say, like where they parade nuclear weapons down the street, where the idea of masculinity is so baked into the defense policies that you call the adversary eunuchs if you're not, as had happened, if you don't have them and so you need them. And this is the real fight, is against the mentality of nuclear weapons making us strong, and so it's most entrenched in certain countries, North Korea too. I mean, and the U.S., but all the countries that have nuclear weapons celebrate their power. And if that's the logic, and taking it back to one thing that you were talking about, in terms of if that is the logic, the only result is more countries getting them. If you're going to keep incentivizing and talking about why you should have them, well, why shouldn't everyone else follow that logic? And the only way that goes is disaster, and it just hastens disaster, right? So Maureen asks, what can we do? What can, what's the next steps here? Where should we be taking it? And I would say you're doing it. I mean, you, Sarah, and you're building this summit. I think is trust the plan, because this is what you're doing. It's building these conversations and raising the voices of people who are traditionally excluded from these conversations, but who are overwhelmingly on our side. That's the way change has always happened. That's the way it happened in the 80s, was activating people who, were just felt like they needed to trust leadership to make the right decision, despite everyone's almost unanimous understanding that that's not going to get us there. And so reframing that, involving ordinary people into this conversation, realizing that they have a role, that's the way we get there before great catastrophe.
Okay, I'm going to have to, I want Ira to just say, because he's going to be leaving with me very shortly, and I know that Kaiser wants to wrap this, and there's food. So would you make your closing remarks before we have a...
Yeah, again, there have been so many points to the one points made that I want to respond to. Let me speak to the question of national pride and strength. Part of the problem, I think, is that there is a conflation of the idea of what makes us strong with what makes us safe, and they're not the same. And it's a problem because historically they probably have been the same. And through much of human history, if you had bigger weapons, you were probably, than your enemy, you were probably safer. And I think that message is deeply internalized in us. You're walking down a dark street at night, somebody's coming at you with a stick. If you get a bigger stick, you feel safer. It's really as simple as that. The problem is, if the stick that you carry is a stick of dynamite, it's going to explode if you use it, then you may be strong, but you're certainly not safe. And that's the situation that we're in right now with nuclear weapons. The countries that have them are definitely strong because of it. They get to threaten everybody else and bully people, but they're not safe. And they can't, that very profound truth is not penetrating. And that's one of the key things I think that we need to help people to understand. It goes back to the old Einstein thing about splitting the atoms, changing everything except what you think. We're not thinking right about this. And we still are willing to risk our safety in order to be strong. And part of it is a misunderstanding. People think that they're being made safer. part of it is there are some people, I think, who understand fully how dangerous these weapons are and want them anyway, because they're willing to run a risk in order to be strong. They're so committed to being the bully on the block that they're willing to run this risk. Oftentimes when they retire, they change their mind. We've seen this over and over again with military leaders and architects of nuclear policy who were all for the nuclear system while they were in power. And then when they weren't in power and realized that they didn't control the situation, and they knew how dangerous it was, they started to get nervous. So I think in terms of countries, and India and Pakistan, I think have this problem particularly, but I think all the nuclear weapons states do. They look to their nuclear weapons as sources of strength and therefore prestige and therefore a positive value is assigned to them. What we need to do is to reverse that equation and get people to understand that you are exposing your families, your communities to an incredible danger by maintaining these weapons, and that needs to be seen as a huge negative. So, and then Maureen had a question, and I don't know exactly how she phrased it about how do you speak to people about this. I think it's really difficult to talk, especially to our friends and family, about this. No one wants to go to dinner with your cousin you haven't seen in 2 years and start talking about the end of the world. And it comes up sometimes, but you feel very self-conscious doing that. And I think we need to cut ourselves a little bit of slack. This is a normal human response, not to want to be always talking about nuclear war. I found it a little bit easier to overcome that in the last few months, just because it's so damn dangerous out there. And I think that we're getting, unfortunately, to a point where world events are going to make it easier for us to have these conversations. I've had many people come up to me, people in my hometown, which is a small city, know that I'm active on this issue. I've had people coming up to me in a way they have never done before in the last few months, asking for, what do you think about this? So I think it's going to get easier for us to have these conversations. Unfortunately, for bad reasons, the global situation is getting so bad. But we need to take advantage of that and sort of make ourselves, have the conversations.
That's wonderful. Councillor, your take on
Yes.
it. If we leave, just because we're I think what should be done, anyone interested, because I think what needed is a strategy session here, right? Follow up. So can Madeira collect anyone that's interested in being invited to a strategy session? And
so
after this is over,
yeah,
right? When we leave, okay. And how long do you have the room for? Okay, so I'm going to take him to the airport. I'll come back.
Okay.
Okay.
And so Dr. Ira would be leaving, as we all know. So I'll just take 30 seconds to hand over some memento for you, and just so that you don't forget us. So just a crest from our institute to honor Dr. Ira's time, and it is and a small keychain. I don't know what kind of key you are going to put it here, but with the hope that you might put some nuclear, starting keys that we see in the movies. Okay. So if you have access. And this T-shirt is from Rule of Law. I'll ask David to hand over this project.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for being with us.
Thank you.
And we can have a break now, I believe, and have some foods for you. And while you take foods, also food for thought. I don't know, he's going to come back. And Seth is with us. Possibly he's not flying away. So we have Seth with us. He has to compensate because we didn't get him on 30th evening. So that is the point. Thank you, Seth.
Yeah.
But we can have food now, and we gather together around 15 minutes. Thank you, folks.
Yeah.
Glad you made this.
Yeah. Later tonight. Just 5 hours delayed. It was just this storm came real fast. Yeah, I'm always very lucky with my travel. So maybe I had it coming. But that was really amazing. I prepared a big lecture on laws and weapons and I didn't use it, so.
For sure.
Any bombardment questions to Mr. Seth? Oh, wow, thanks. Thank you. Folks, please take your seats. Take your seats, please. Thank you very much. And great.
Yeah. This happened. The audience.
So what we are planning to do till David comes back is to engage with Seth, and we have one bonus lawyer with us.
You get to do triple duty.
I just wrote it. It's my fault again.
So we had a couple of questions going on, and I think we'll start with those ones. And once David returns, we'll go back to our discussion on strategy and what we can do. And I think Seth didn't have much time to respond to some of the questions that we had in the previous session. So floor is open, and I'm not sure who's going to get the first questions up. Or Seth is free to respond if he is willing to and remembers what you have spoken. So it's kind of free-flowing discussion. I'd like to kickstart. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the last session it's a real test of like cognitive skills, because in a lot of the UN type systems or governmental systems, they'll take 3 questions, and then someone you respond to all 3 questions. It's like, oh my gosh, there's like 5 to remember at all these points, but so many great points, and everyone here has their own like long history or short history, but are engaged in this question in some way. So it's great to talk a little further, and I'm fine with the free-flowing discussion as you suggest, and I don't know where to pick up exactly. But I just to add though, because we were just talking a bit about the work to what's actually functionally involved in getting countries to change their positions and to join the treaty, because that's the work that I do, is almost less in law, more not advocacy. My work is at the UN and then in capitals, going to different capitals, meeting with decision makers and changing their minds, or if they're even on the right side, to get them to do the brave thing, to take that step to join a treaty for which there's no obvious benefit to them in some material way. And it's really challenging, but also really exciting, because we've done it 99 times now. We've got 99 countries to either sign this treaty or to fully join it. And each one of them has their own story, their own journey of why they would do something that the big powers in the world asked them not to do. Pressure is a huge problem with the treaty and its advancement. And so each of these stories has been so inspiring for me, keeps me going. One day we'll write a book with all the stories that we can't tell now, but it's that's what gives me real hope, is that these are really just humans who need to be convinced to do what they know is right. And once you get them to do it, that's it. It's done. Yeah.
Seth, so 99 countries is quite an achievement. I mean, kudos for that. But again, we know that we need those 9. So these crucial 9, we have to convince them. And then again, we have G7 nations, and including us. Yeah. So what are the main obstacles that you see? We have heard some bit of discussions, but can you specifically, because you have worked with a lot of people and focusing on Canada, give us 3 main challenges that you face to convince big 9s and also smaller, couple of us?
The number 1 challenge is the one we talked about already in the last session, which is, and in a subsequent conversation here, we were making the analogy to religion. these 9 countries are, you could call them nuclear theocracies. It's because it is tantamount to a religion. In many ways, and one of the ways we were just talking about is it's based on the coincidence of your birth. That if you are born just the way if you were born in a country where most people around you are Muslim, you're raised Muslim, and that's your faith, and that's just a coincidence of your birth. And the same is true as if you're raised Catholic or Christian, right? This is true for nuclear weapons. It's like it's not baked in people's DNA that if they're born in Namibia, they are against nuclear weapons, full stop. And if they're born in France, they, even in nuclear armed countries, we still have the majority of support, but more people support nuclear weapons in these countries. It's not a coincidence. I mean, it is a coincidence, I'm saying, but the coincidence is based on where they're born. So this is the number one thing to disentangle, is to help people understand that if you are in one of these 9 states, you are in a minority of global opinion. And even in your country, you're in a minority of this opinion, and you need to start engaging with it in a way that helps a conversation that brings you hopefully to the right side, because we believe that anyone seriously engaged in that conversation will come to our side. That's number 1. Number 2, I guess I would say, or maybe this is number 1, I don't know the right names exactly as I'm dealing with the question in this framing for the first time, I would say is the military industrial economy. And the nuclear industrial economy. There are only 26 companies that manufacture, and maintain nuclear weapons in the world. I mean, basically, so we have a report that we annually publish called "Don't Bang on the Bomb." That's kind of the blueprint for understanding what this industry is and where they are. But I mean, the fact that it's such a limited number of companies. It also gives us a blueprint for changing the whole system. We were talking in the last session about how entrenched the problem of climate change is in our economies. But that is like there's no separating capitalism from the climate crisis. This is like an inexorably complicated problem. But nuclear weapons, it is just a few companies, but they have this stranglehold on our political systems. We haven't been able to precisely put a number on how much money goes into the lobbying. We've been trying to get our heads around that, and we have some analysis around the numbers. But we do know that last year, over $100 billion now, we just topped $100 billion, have been spent on nuclear weapons. And we know that that money is going to ultimately to a lot of, for very few people and shareholders and leaders that are perpetuating this problem, at least as they're at the very top of the problem for how we get out of this. And, capitalism, no, I'm not casting aspersions on different economic systems. Maybe it's the best one we have. But one thing we should all realize about capitalism is, that in order for, especially in publicly traded companies, you have to grow. Like growth is endemic to capitalism. That's a company can't just be satisfied with their annual profits. They need to keep increasing. Well, if your business is the military, then that means you need to keep making reasons to build. And the danger, of course, is that you don't make weapons that don't get used. When Donald Trump this past week talked about testing nuclear weapons, he presented this from a security framework, but there was also the capitalist framework. People are building these things and they need to ultimately test them to ultimately be used. That's an inevitability of the economic system. That's number 2. I hadn't thought of number 3 yet. But because those are the ones that really ricochet in my mind. It's the most obvious challenges, because it's like changing minds and changing systems. But I think the other is also just I would say in bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is entrenched for good reason, I think, to keep things focused on a status quo. Radical change is hard in a bureaucracy, right? But this is, I grew up in the US, and the idea of walking up to the Department of Energy in the US and being like, "Hi, I'd like to talk to you about nuclear disarmament," as a regular person is absurd. But what I found through the course of the work that I've been doing, and maybe some of you involved in activism, it's been the case as well, is that my experience with ICANN has totally reversed my belief in the power of just ordinary people to make a difference. And working with smaller governments, of course, was my entry point to that, realizing that we are, even in bureaucracies, just talking about people. And if you convince enough people, then change happens. It's as simple as that. And we were just having this conversation about one country just before this, where they couldn't be convinced to do the brave thing that they knew was right until a leader just stepped in and was like, you know what, we're doing it. And that's really all it took. And I think that it's difficult for us, those of us who do live in like bigger systems, to believe that something can just change. But as we said, the whole framing of this discussion is that this is a problem that's solvable with political will. You get that political will by just convincing the people to do the right thing. And sometimes that's just a few people. And that's all that's required. Yeah, so those are my three.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've probably, thank you for responding to that. That definitely gave me a lot to think about. But you've probably heard this comeback. But like, well, how do you respond when people say, "Well, what about Ukraine? They gave it up and now look where they are."
I've got one. You probably have one too, because this is something in our community people talk about certainly all the time.
Yeah.
Like, and it's a really challenging one because no one could do counterfactuals where we don't actually have, we don't know what it would be like if Ukraine had tried to maintain the nuclear weapons that they inherited once the Soviet Union broke apart. But we can be pretty sure, I think, that even if we don't know if the Ukraine would have been attacked if they had nuclear weapons, or rather, if nuclear weapons could have prevented Russia from invading them now, we can know that it wouldn't have prevented them from being attacked much earlier. I mean, the US and Russia would never have let them keep nuclear weapons to have independence. Almost certainly would have invaded them way earlier if they had tried to retain them. And I think that what we do know is that there may be instances. I mean, if you liken it to just general, I think small arms even as well. Like you can think of instances where like you're able to deter someone from acting in a specific instance, but the real question has to be, can you deter in all instances? Because if not, then you're talking about the end of humanity. So in other words, if even if they had been prevented from attacking Ukraine because of nuclear weapons in one specific time, does that mean that they would never have done so? And the counterfactual there we can prove, because we know that nuclear armed states have been attacked. I mean, Israel was attacked in the 70s when it was widely known that they had nuclear weapons. Argentina attacked the Falklands. The U.S. has been attacked on many fronts. India, Pakistan have had skirmishes despite having nuclear weapons. Like the idea that we're just like full stop, Ukraine, if it had nuclear weapons, would have been invaded, is just something we don't know. But I think that we do know that nuclear armed states have been attacked before. And look at states that have also pursued disarmament, who had weapons, like South Africa, that had nuclear weapons and decided it didn't keep them safer, and have not been attacked ever since they gave them. So anyway, that's some of the things I think about.
Yeah, so I mean, always beginning any statement with the fact that, considering that I'm here in my official capacity, I do need to hedge my answer in the sense that I need to keep within my mandate on armament, their legacy, and of course, human rights more broadly. But I think I could address this by building upon what Seth had mentioned earlier, how this conversation is an issue of framing. And I think it's also a matter of framing a narrative more broadly. And the response that you've pointed out in your question, it builds upon the narrative of security, right? Like there was an invasion, what would be the security response? But if we were to reframe that from security to human rights as a rule of law, then the human rights response would then focus perhaps not so much on the deterrent power of nuclear weapons, but on the accountability mechanisms that could have prevented or can address this having already occurred. So I think this somewhat addresses your point, and of course the point that was the question raised earlier by Kauser as to the issues that we face in this discussion. So much of it is driven by the language and priorities of the states that do have nuclear weapons, and that we're playing within that court, within that framework. One thing that we're trying to do through this mandate that I work on, which is the first Human Rights Council mandate on the human rights impacts of nuclear weapons, which is quite a baffling thing if you think about it, considering how the human rights impacts of nuclear weapons doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to conceive that this is the first time doing this, is a pivoting in that approach. It is an approach to the disarmament discourse, which not only considers humanitarian considerations, but uses the language of human rights as a framework of existing legal obligations that could advance the good work that I can help advance the good work that I can and many others have been engaged in.
Okay, so I know that all these disarmament treaties came through significant social movements. People got together, they lobbied, and it went through. So, like as an example, the Mine Ban Treaty, which was signed quite some time back. But the thing is, people who ratified the treaty, Mine Ban Treaty, is leaving the treaty. So that would happen with the nuclear ban treaty as well. So my question is, how can advocates or people who are advocating keep in the business, doing advocating when these kind of shortfalls happen? People leave, or what drives you?
Yeah, this also harkens to an earlier discussion about what is the meaning of law, and then what is the meaning of international law. And we often get faced with this question that's often framed as people are going to transgress, so why this is such a pointless exercise, right? And it's kind of like, I always find that, first of all, a baffling kind of framing, because it's like, murder is illegal, we know people are going to murder. Does that mean we just say, well, forget it? Let's not even try. That's crazy to me. And so what I'm often thinking about is not just the legal shift that we're building, but the normative shift and how they work together. So mines are such a perfect example of something that nobody should want, like anti-personnel mines anywhere, but certainly they're like the ultimate, I think, example of something that's self-harm, an act of self-harm. So when countries today are talking about leaving the Mine Ban Treaty and taking these steps to do so, mostly these European countries now, it's a great travesty for international law and needs to be condemned. But it hurts them most of all. We know the statistics show, they're going to lay mines on their own territory. You can't lay mines on your adversary's territory. And whatever deterring power they might have is, again, something much like the Ukraine example. It's a counterfactual that doesn't exist yet, but probably is minimal to know. If Russia wants to bring tanks across, into Latvia or Estonia, mines are not going to stop them from doing it. But they will exist after this conflict. And the statistics show that they will kill almost 80% will be civilians, something like this. And that almost all of those will be children. So why a country would do something like this and act out of fear is now back to the discussion of trust, and do something that's self-harming is, of course, baffling to begin with. But what I think is interesting, and the reason that both I think about where you're asking, like in terms of, what good is this treaty at this point, is first of all, to imagine a world where it didn't exist. Like, these countries have to now take legal steps to first leave this treaty, and then before they're going to actually lay them on. So that's one hindrance to them actually doing it. There's a reason why Ukraine, for example, right now has not been able just to say we're leaving the treaty, but rather that they're suspending the treaty. And that's because there's a provision in the treaty, which we copied in the Ottawa Treaty, which we copied in the PNW, that says that you cannot exit the treaty within 6 months of being in an armed conflict. So it has a legal effect, even as there's this great normative transgression that's helpful. Imagine a world where it didn't exist, and to my mind, we would be in a situation that would be worse, because there would be, no barriers to them laying these mines. And most of all, and most importantly, because as we know, just to go back to the beginning, law is not in itself the solution, but we need states and we need citizens and people, and what we need to be doing now, to condemn this as an act of self-harm, as an act that undermines international trust, cooperation, and security. And that's happening to some extent, and I think we owe the treaty for that as well. It needs to happen more in every space we're in. We should be condemning this and pointing out what an act of self-harm it is, and how undermining it is to their own security, but also to the security of the whole world. Because if you start eroding this norm, then it's inevitable that others will follow as well. That all the places that have made such progress in demining in Southeast Asia, for example, in South Asia, it's going to regress for them as well. And this will be unequivocally harmful.
Perhaps I could address this as well in two ways. The first would be a rather straightforward legalistic response that might not be as convincing as the second. So the first would be, I think, the recognition of the importance of how in international law, the sources do not only look at convention, but custom as well. And I think there's something to be said about the benefits of looking at customary international law in contrast to treaty law. Of course, I think we see this manifesting, for example, in the realm of environment and climate change. There is no treaty in the UN system that recognizes explicitly the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Yet we do have a HRC and a UNGA resolution that does. And arguably, this could evidence opinion this. So that's the first part of my answer. The second is, I think, a broader framing, which is how law was never conceived as a self-fulfilling system. And I think international law and human rights law particularly get a lot of flack in that regard, how it is not respected. And I think this speaks to Seth's point. I mean, even in domestic law, we see domestic laws being violated. That doesn't really put into question the function of the rule of law at all. Yet for some reason, we see that sort of argumentation and that sort of rhetoric more often in the realm of IL. So I think there's something to be taken away from that, in the sense that the violation of the law or the recalcitrance of some states, to me, does not say, oh, it goes to show it doesn't work. Rather, my conclusion is different. It goes to show that we need to make this work. And perhaps to do that, and again, to loop this back to my own mandate, it's a question of making it work through accountability mechanisms. So much of the discussion is about preventing things from happening, and rightfully so. But I think a part of the conversation also needs to look at what are the consequences if and when these human rights violations occur. And then unfortunately, we've seen less of that. But there are mechanisms out there. There are the hybrid tribunals, there's the ICC. There are several ways of thinking of justice beyond accountability in its traditional form, and that's what we're trying to explore through this work.
I found both answers compelling.
Yeah.
Both. Not so serious. I mean, you said the law one would be as compelling as the other one.
Folks, we are going to wrap up soon because it's lunchtime and we don't want our guests to remain hungry, right? So we call ourselves Friendly Manitoba. We're very friendly. So yeah, any last question, last comments?
Yeah.
So earlier when you were talking about the economic aspects of expanding the nuclear capabilities, do you think the same calculus classes could also be used in lobbying for the nuclear disarmament movement? And, you know that the disarmament has largely force, but as you have implied earlier, that they are very much low profit. And if a nuclear war happens, then there will be no capital left for them to fight.
I feel like I planted this question, so thank you, because I was answering the first question, giving the nature of the problems, but I didn't get into the solutions, and this is very much part of our strategy, is that our work is not just making nuclear weapons illegal; it's about making them irrelevant, and one of the best ways to do that in a society that is, as I said, fundamentally structured around the profit margin is to change the profit margins. And so the other part of the Dauphin on the Bond report is the blueprint for divestment. And we have, obviously we've got a long way to go, but we've had some major successes in the divestment plan. And so first we've had these, I said we have 99 countries that signed or ratified the treaty. So it's 74 of them that have fully ratified it. For those countries, it's illegal under the terms of the TPNW, which is the first ever comprehensive prohibition of everything to do with nuclear weapons, but also assisting others to do anything with nuclear weapons, which is generally interpreted to include investing in nuclear production and maintenance of nuclear weapons. And so it's illegal in those countries now to invest in nuclear weapons. Now, those are not the richest countries in the world, but we do have, and by the way, this is just a little quick tangent about which countries support us and how are we making progress given that the largest countries are not on board the treaty. Well, that's a bit of a misframing that I think might be some of maybe where we are in the world right now, sitting in Canada, kind of a northern mindset. 5 of the 10 biggest countries in the world are nuclear armed states or nuclear endorsing states that don't support us, but the other 5 are TPNW states, parties, or signatories. So those are the 5 of the 10 biggest populations in the world that are also included among these countries for which it's illegal to invest in nuclear weapons. But even in states that don't support the treaty, like Norway, for example, we've seen one of the largest divestment actions ever, where the Norwegian state pension fund has been forced to divest some trillions of dollars, I don't have the number from my head right now, from companies that manufacture or make nuclear weapons. And why do they do it? It's not illegal in Norway necessarily, because Norway is not a state party. But a lot of these finance companies and banks and and pension funds look at financial risk. They look at international law. And one of the things they had always cited in the past was to say that, but it's not illegal in our country. But they look at international law, they see that it's now illegal, and investors have said it's a business risk too to invest. And that's very much part of the strategy, is pulling the rug out. And once again, this is not our innovation as some great, like geniuses of civil society. We stand on the shoulders of those who have done it before us. Take the Cluster Munitions Convention, for example, that the United States never joined the Cluster Munitions Convention, so it's not illegal in the United States to manufacture cluster munitions or to invest in those that do. But in 2016, the last manufacturer of cluster munitions shuttered. Textron in Rhode Island in the US shuttered that business portfolio because enough countries had pulled their money out of it and it was no longer financially profitable for them to make clusters. And so, this has affected in a very clear way, I think, even for states where it's not prohibited, has affected the reality of this weapon system, making it stigmatized and also contributed to stigmatizing it. Like there's a reason why that people are pushing for them not to make it. They're unacceptable. And I think this is very much like part of our plan that we hope people will, we have to keep doing this and keep building this. But I think it's kind of, I think, encouraging to point to this because it's a way that we can have an impact even on the states that are not supportive of this treaty.
Can I just say this? Before he left, we've had this conversation before, really talking about his impression of how our education system or schools get involved in the youth nuclear peace summit. He said it's also so much more difficult in the US. So we explore that. I mean, the fact is, the United States does not support wholesomely the United Nations at all, but certainly not UNESCO. Okay? And Canada does support UNESCO. Province of Manitoba supports UNESCO. And it is was a fundamental source of the origin. Estelle Lambrou was hosting a UNESCO schools event in Winnipeg, an international event for UNESCO Associated Schools Network Project Schools. They were only brought into Manitoba in 2002 because someone went to Germany and saw what a great idea this was. Came back, a guy named Neufeld, a Mennonite, integrated back into his school, and then she became the head of the UNESCO Associated Schools Network for the province of Manitoba. And she also served as a volunteer national education coordinator on Canadian Commission for UNESCO. Canadian Commission for UNESCO supports the Youth Nuclear Peace Summit, right? So where are we in our world with UNESCO? There was a piece of peace education curriculum, okay, which was created in 1972 and adopted by UNESCO for all schools around the world, okay? And it was just in 2023 approved by 194 UNESCO countries, members, okay? A new version of peace education. So can we not bring UNESCO and education into this and also help the United States? Stella can tell stories. Stella used.
Well, first of all, Seth, that was what you just shared about. People love to talk about money, and what you just shared would be a perfect call to action on our list of how just the person in the house next door doesn't know how to engage. That's a perfect one.
Call your bank.
So yeah. you go to the bank, or you go to Cardinal, you go to the where your money is, or if
yeah.
or you. So I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
The UNESCO schools is definitely what their link was the sustainable build SDGs, the SDGs as Sustainable Development Goals. If we link that with them, and we did, I don't know if you noticed, MCIC, Manitoba Council for International Cooperation, they had posted how it impacts those goals. They have a huge, that is their focus, targets like that. So this definitely hits a whole bunch of those targets, right?
Yeah.
So we have to frame things for these kind of organizations to see, oh yeah, because it's so, that's like what we've said all along, that it's so, it's not discussed, it's not talked about. But so I think we're in a pivotal position here in Manitoba that we can do something quite astounding just by the sheer fact that UNESCO started in the Canadian Commission for UNESCO started here in Manitoba. This is the birthplace of that.
Yeah, I mean I also take from that story and those two stories really too is about why are we, in this always looking to others to initiate this solution when we know that we can start it here. And the refrain from the Canadian government, for example, has always pointed to look, we believe, we've had positive, language around the treaty from the last foreign minister, even when she was in office, but it's just without action, right? And looking, because they say we have to look to the current position of our allies. NATO, as if someone else was responsible for this problem, when we're all responsible. And, Canada, of course, we know has a complicated history with nuclear weapons and hosted US nuclear weapons until 1984, contributed to building the first atomic weapons, uranium that perhaps was in the bomb that was detonated over Hiroshima, came from Canada. So I think this
India, the same thing.
What's that?
Nuclear reactor in India resulted in them getting atomic.
So it's just a matter of, I think, us seizing our role and realizing that the change does start here, not pointing to someone else. Because that's, if you even go to people in the US who are willing to engage about this, one thing they will say is, they'll say, look, we want to advance nuclear disarmament, but our partners, the Japanese, the Eastern Europeans in NATO, they need this. They'll be very upset. North South Korea, we can't take any moves, or else they'll get their own nuclear weapons. So we have to. We would advance this, but it's that's the problem. So also engage with them and say, we would like to take steps towards nuclear disarmament, but the Russians won't engage. I think the idea that everyone's looking to the idea that someone else will take care of this. So we need to, if we realize the urgency of it, realize that we have the power to do it. And the UNESCO story is
It would be nothing to ask companies or banks. If we have social enterprises here to point out which companies are actually funding.
They do.
What are the student presentations?
So you can have all that, but in a to-do list for
We've had our campaigners do the shareholder action thing where they buy.
So you got that?
Well, we needed more. I'm not saying it's being taken care of. I'm saying but we have people doing it and we need to do it more. I mean, showing up to shareholder meetings and asking questions, announcing that you're withdrawing money because of this, asking your mutual funds where the money, if those companies are in there, going to your pension funds. You could, go into your universities.
You get the university students involved. They're trying to defund the climate change.
We need more people doing it, and I do think that will bring about change.
Anyways, I know.
I just wanted to point out one thing that in the 80s, where things went, and it wasn't about this kind of thing, what companies do we go after, what people do we go after. That was all included, but there were two women who spoke up and did things. One was Helen Caldecott, who was a doctor. I worked with her, and she walked around telling people the truth. And the thing they didn't want to hear. She said, this is the end of the war. This is the final. And they organized conferences and they held them all over. The second woman was Randy Forsberg. Randy Forsberg was from Geneva, I think, worked at a arms control agency. And she came back, she was for US, and she came back and she said, we need something that people can get behind. So she conceived of the nuclear freeze, and for several years, she wrote up a plan for the nuclear freeze and circulated it to a number of people all over, I don't know if it was over the world, but at least over the United States. And finally, they came up with an agreed document. And the nuclear freeze movement began to spread. It became an election issue in California, the biggest state in the United States, and was passed. And it had great pressure on Congress, but it was a conversation. It was something people could get their minds about. She said, people cannot understand the scientific or a lot of the complicated questions about nuclear weapons, but they can understand stopping making them and making no more. And so she gave a certain goal. Now, I think that's necessary, and maybe the abolition of nuclear weapons is necessary, but we went backwards afterwards. And so what we need is not only stopping them or abolishing them, what that's going to get us and what we need to work and commit ourselves to, and that is human well-being. That is feeding people who need to be fed. That is housing people who need to be housed. That is taking care of our environment. Those things are not distinct from the idea that we commit suicide, species suicide. They in fact are part of the conversation. If we're not gonna create well-being for people, it's intuitive that we're gonna have conflict. So moving beyond nuclear weapons means creating well-being, means making the world a place where everybody feels they can belong. And those kinds of statements are critical, and they're what people want. They want to feel their belonging, and that they are part of something. So I think these questions are really important. But security means also a sense of well-being and belonging, and what security is.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
And equal opportunity.
So you know, some of us are going to Earl Grey's. No, Earl Grey Cheese. Earl's Restaurant, which is right Fuller Park, the one there, and some are there already. So I just want to encourage you, if you do want to come, please do so.
Okay.
I
I'll
need
wrap
to
up.
leave.
I'll wrap up. Just give me 2 minutes.
Sure.
So,
Should we be lobbying towards server status with the Canadian government or skip that phase? Like, we're not gonna get them to sign up, right? But should that be an action item?
Should I?
yes, please, very quickly.
I'll try it very quickly. You know, I think about some of the work that we're doing in terms of like the Overton window shift of, you know, sociological consciousness, and that like if you have to ask for the end goal to get anything. You have to frame it as evolution. And that is in the 80s, by the way, you know, that was a very complicated collaboration. I mean, you were there, but everything I know, being very young at the time, but you know, the coalitions that were built with the abolitionists were what got us over the line. People do respond to the message of total abolition. It's just that you have to present it to them in the right way. And so you can give them, you know, this. Obviously, Canada will not, I mean, I'm sure will not sign the treaty immediately, but they can observe this first review conference and can engage with the states that are taking forward this work in a productive way. They can even come and make a bad statement if they want to. But this idea of we don't get there by just, you know, it's sort of like the seesaw theory too. You gotta push on the end of the seesaw to make it move at all. If you push in the middle and make that your goal, it doesn't move. And so I think, you know, like we have to come up with a strategy to make that an ask, but not make that like the goal it's in. And so, yes, I do think they should observe. I think that is a tangible thing we can all get for next year, that review conference, by the way, November 30th through December 4th of 2026. But I think that we also have to be sure that we're framing it as like, we do expect Canada to join this. But the least you can do is observe it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we are going to end this session, and we thank you all, all of you for being with us. And before Seth departs, just a memento for him as well, because Seth was a little anxious that whether we should, cater for him. Yes, we did. So David, so it's a small crest from our institute, Seth, just to remember your time with us, although very short. And same comments about the keychain. If you find any keys of nuclear device, please feel free to hang it here. And T-shirt from David's project.
Thank you very much.
And and I'm sure if you have any questions, should, because the whole session was live streamed, and you can go back and listen to Seth in more, when you are a little relaxed, maybe you have time. So I'd request you to kindly see those live streaming and put your comments, and that is very useful. Sometimes we think that, why should I, write a comment? But your comment is useful because that is a feedback to Seth's comments and others, those who were present here today. Okay, so from the Institute, once again, thank you very much. From Mediation Services also, thank you very much for hosting and allowing us to be here today. Goodbye, take care.
No, thank you.
It was fine.